Everybody, Mr. Harvey here. Let's finish up that chapter 15 lecture. We're going to talk a little bit about labor, trade unions. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the mass of political parties, the new political kind of sphere at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, and socialism. And remember, we are on the way to World War I, that cataclysmic event that is really going to define the 20th century and mold the current Western world. So we have been talking about the Industrial Revolution and how much of a game changer it is for Europe politically, socially, and economically. And we know that the Industrial Revolution has really changed the world economically when it comes to the idea of labor. And we have a new, social class in Europe, which is the working class. Artisans, skilled workers, they are on the out. We have the proletariat as labeled by Marx. We have the workers. These unskilled workers are now the dominant body within the European and, almost world economy. We know that artisans and highly skilled workers are declining because they simply can't compete with the machines. If you are a shoemaker, you can't compete with, mechanized shoe companies that can produce a lot more shoes for a lot cheaper with their machines. So we see the majority of factory workers, the majority of the working class are wage earners. And workers have a lot of avenues in order to improve their lives inside and outside of work. You have socialist groups, which we will talk about more through the end of this chapter. You have political parties, and you have unions. And unions, ladies and gentlemen, were flourishing in the late 19th century and early 20th century. Unions were a very prominent part of many working class groups and workers. And we've talked a little bit about unions before. I'm a teacher. I'm a member of a teachers union. The goal of a union and the kind of point of a union was to help workers with wages, with working conditions, to help to defend them against the bourgeoisie, to defend them against corporations, their bosses. And it was skilled workers and unskilled workers were unionized during this time. As a teacher, right, I have a union, and they fight for our salaries, classroom sizes, materials, and if things don't go well, we teachers have the ability to collectively with our union to go on strike, right? And therefore, the school is not getting what it wants in terms of y'all's education. So unions were a tool for workers to continue to fight for their rights and improve their conditions. And as I said before, they could engage in strikes in order to achieve their demands. Obviously, businesses and employers are not stoked with unions. They disagree with unions because unions are taking away money and power. So businesses didn't necessarily like unions. But we're seeing governments protect unions because, well, they want the workers on their side. So they're definitely not going to take away their protections that allow for them to fight for more rights against their bosses and their companies and corporations. But despite the growth of unions, ladies and gentlemen, there were so many different avenues for workers to gain rights that most of Europe's labor force really never unionized. And that's because they had different ways to fight for their rights. They could join a political party, and we're going to see many political parties fight for their rights, or they could go to a more socialist political party. So there's different avenues for them to fight for their rights. Okay, and here's a picture of a advertisement for a union, the National Union of Gas Workers and Central Laborers in Great Britain and Ireland. I believe it says 1889 right there. 8 hours of labor. Fighting for certain wages, fighting for benefits, healthcare. Fighting for legislation, fighting for things to help the workers and the working class out. Political parties. Political parties were another way that workers could kind of fight for their rights. Except for Russia, all major European states had major political parties rising in the late 1800s. Great Britain, building upon that Great Reform Act of 1832, continued to extend the right to vote to its workers, which makes sense. The Great Britain is trying to prevent radical groups from rising. Great Britain is trying to prevent revolution. What's one of the best ways you can do that? Make sure your working class is stoked. Make sure that they're happy. So take a look. I mean, Germany, OVB, we know he's no dummy. He is going to pass universal male suffrage to get the workers on his side. He is doing this in order to, stave off the liberals so he can take credit for this. And this is a way to make the working class happy. They have a say in government. And we see numerous Western European countries follow suit. It's because you could not ignore your workers. You could allow your discontented groups to fight for a belief, to have some power. And if they have some power, they're less likely to revolt and cause major problems in a country. Now, with many men, universal male suffrage, remember, women are going to get the right to vote after World War I. You're going to see with male suffrage becoming more universal, you're going to see massive organized political parties. And that's going to be a staple of some of the Western democracies. I mean, we see it in the United States right now. We have 2020, the huge presidential election, congressional elections, governor's elections, state elections. We're in an election year. We have massive organized political parties in the United States. You have your Republicans, you have your Democrats. They're on TV with their advertisements in newspapers, on the radio. They're sending, advertisements, and they're sending their own kind of talking points in the mail. That's a big part of this mass organized political parties that we have today. And political parties, had workers, newspapers, offices. Today we have political parties on Twitter or Facebook, right, using social media. But they are designed to mobilize, energize, and educate new voters, older voters, and to get them out to vote for them so they can take power. With massive political parties, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to see for the first time socialism have a big voice. Because we are going to see some socialist political parties. I mean, look at what's going on in America. You have part of the most radical part of the Democratic wing is the socialist wing led by Bernie. You have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York. You have Elizabeth Warren. We're going to see with these massive political parties and massive organized political parties, you're going to see socialism have more of a voice and educate people on socialism. Now, we know that there are many different... Socialism is not one thing. We have a broad definition of socialism. You have your very radical socialists, our Marxists, our communists, our scientific socialists. You have your St. Simeons, a different group of socialists. So one of the big things about socialists, and especially in France, we'll talk about, was how divided they were. You had some who wanted to, mainly reform through legislation. You had some who wanted to start a revolution, like the Marxists. That's going to be a really big problem for socialists because many of these socialist groups won't agree on stuff. And because they don't present a united front, that's really going to prevent them from, facilitating a whole bunch of change. Okay. Another weakness of socialism, and something in particular that Marx did not foresee, was nationalism. Marx, remember at the very, very, very end of his book, well, we never read it, but at the very end of his book, he says, "Workers of the world, unite!" He did not predict for nationalism. Karl Marx thought that the workers, regardless of nationality, would unite around their social class. Therefore, you'd see the workers of Germany, of France, of Britain, of Belgium, of the Netherlands, of Spain, of Russia. They would all unite and overthrow their governments, overthrow the bourgeoisie. Well, that's not going to happen. Nationalism is going to prevent this. You're going to see people unite based on their nationality, their ethnicity, not their social class. And we're going to see that prevail with World War I. You're going to see the German workers back up Germany. You're going to see the Russian workers back up Russia. They're going to unite not by how much money they have, but by their common bonds of history. They're going to unite by their language. They're going to unite by nationalism. That's going to be a really big problem for socialists. Now, the First International is a meeting of socialists and other different groups, but mainly of socialists. There's, I think, 4 or 5 international meetings we're going to meet. We're going to talk about. They're going to meet. But this was, the first one is really important, and I want to make a point of this and talk about this. This was a meeting of French and British trade unionists, Polish nationalists, some anarchists, some other socialists. And what's important about this, ladies and gentlemen, is at this meeting, the First International, we see Marxism become the most popular form and talked about form of socialism. And that's going to be really prominent because we are going to see Marxism become kind of the face of socialism. And there's no coincidence that when Vladimir Lenin and Russia revolt, they're not going to become Saint Simeon socialists. No, they're going to become Marxist socialists. And that is because we are going to see Marxism become kind of the face of socialism. Now, you might ask why. Well, Marxism, what made it so appealing, ladies and gentlemen, and what made it so stand out amongst socialists and so popular was how scientific it was. Remember, we're in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Science, secularism is definitely now entrenched as the dominant viewpoint, especially with Darwinism going on. Science is huge, and many people see the world rationally, secularly, and scientifically. They view that is how they perceive the world. And the scientific characteristics of Marxism, the how reasoned and how rational it was, how entrenched it was within the empiricism and rationality of the scientific revolution and enlightenment, it made it very popular, and it made it the most appealing form of socialism, and it's going to become very popular because of this First International. Okay, let's stop here. I'm going to create another video so I can get this uploaded. I'm going to talk about social reform in Great Britain, in France, and in Germany, and end talking about Vladimir Lenin, the Bolsheviks, and the Revolution of 1905. We will stop here, and I'll create another video that kind of ends chapter 15.